Hey, Chris, welcome to the His and Her Money Show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm super glad to have you here. You have a whole knowledge base around FI, financial independence, and the FIRE movement. And we're super glad to have you on to share your story and your expertise with the audience today. But for those who are unfamiliar with who you are and your work, can you just take a minute to say hello to everyone that's tuned in right now and let them know what you're all about?
Hi, my name is Chris Mamula, and I normally write at the blog Can I Retire Yet? And I just wrote with the guys who do the Choose FI podcast a new book called Choose FI: Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. And what got me into this topic was it was 2012. I can tell you exactly when it was because it happened when we found out my wife was pregnant. And up until that point, my wife and I were very good savers. And I think that just came from a position for us of it felt comfortable and it gave us some security uh, because we both grew up in homes that didn't have a lot of money and financial security. But we were really ignorant and illiterate on the technical aspects of personal finance, investing, tax planning, retirement planning, no clue what we were doing. And so when we had this new life that we were responsible for, it made me get really serious. And that's when I found the fire blogs and went down that rabbit hole.
So, financial independence. It seems only for the chosen few. It seems like something that the average person doesn't have a real shot at achieving. True or false?
So in my opinion, that is incredibly false. My wife and I, we both grew up in families that just didn't have a lot of money. My family, my background, my mom is just extremely good at stretching a dollar and making it go further. So she took a below average income for our household, and she was able to, just through just diligent saving and frugality, providing for my brother and I. They basically were able to pay for the majority of our undergraduate college and still live a nice lifestyle themselves, nothing extravagant, but put themselves on track for retirement. And for my wife, she came from a very similar um, income background, but her family just wasn't good with money. And so they struggled, and she felt that growing up, and particularly in high school when they had some financial struggles. So for both of us, saving felt really good, and we got on this track very early. So you definitely can do it with normal incomes. We both worked regular jobs. Neither of us ever made a six-figure salary, and I quit my job when I was 41, and we decided we were financially independent enough to move on and live the life that we really wanted to live at that point.
Nice. So take us back now. Did you all hear that? He retired at 41, not 65, not 67, not 70, 41 years old. Let's rewind the clock back though, when you're about to be parents and it was like, oh my goodness, we need to figure this money stuff out. For a lot of people, they have that thought process. They have that line of thinking like, oh, I got to get my stuff together. In that moment right there, when you were in that position, what did you do? Because you didn't, come into adulthood with the knowledge of retiring at 41. So in that moment where you were like, we got to get our stuff together, we're about to have a baby, what did you do right there in that moment?
Yeah, so that's a great question. But if I can rewind a little bit, actually a lot further. So when we were just getting out of school, so I kind of alluded to how my parents were just totally anti-debt, and I had that beaten into me from a young age. My wife, she totally put herself through school. She had not one penny of parental assistance. So she worked full time while going to school full time. So I knew she was a really hard worker. It wasn't like she was irresponsibly accumulating debt. But just inevitably, she graduated with about between $20,000 and $25,000 of debt, and that freaked me out knowing we were getting married. So we came up with a plan before we ever got married. We decided to combine our finances, and what we decided to do was live off of her income because I was still in graduate school, going to become a physical therapist. And the little bit of money I was making, I was putting everything towards getting her out of debt. So we kind of had a plan to work as a team doing this stuff, and it worked really well. And we were within a year, we were able to get out of debt before we were married. So we just decided to keep doing that. So we were living off her salary and banking mine our entire career. So we kind of had our stuff together. Like we had the savings part down, but it was all the technical stuff. Like we just thought investing, normal people can't learn to invest, tax planning, all that kind of stuff. And we were still, even though we were saving, we had our house paid off by the time my daughter was born. We had a nice portfolio built up, but we were making a lot of mistakes in spite of that because we were really caught up in that limiting belief that normal people just can't learn this stuff, and investing is complicated and tax planning is complicated. And so when I found these fire blogs and they really simplified things, and I wanted to reach out to a wider audience and say, this isn't for extreme frugality where you're not spending anything, because that wasn't our experience. We traveled, we lived a nice lifestyle, but we just got a lot of the big things right. A lot of the things that we were reading these other fire bloggers do, like controlling your housing costs, controlling your transportation costs. And if you do those big things right, you don't have to suffer and sacrifice. As long as you're making a average or above average income, you can do this.
One of the things you said in your book was this stuff, I'm paraphrasing, you said this stuff is easy, or you said it's not complex, you know what I mean? It's easy, but it's down to three things: spend less, earn more, and invest wisely. Now, it sounds like, man, wait, is that it? You sure? There's nothing else? So can you kind of break down what you mean inside those three things when you say spend less, earn more, and invest wisely is the core to positioning yourself to be able to achieve financial independence?
Yeah, so we were very intentional with the way we structured the book. So we start with spend less, and I think a lot of people immediately they kind of like clam up with that, and like they think frugality equals sacrifice. And so what we really start with is just reframing the whole conversation. So I kind of talked about my wife and my background. For us, saving was really, it provided us with a feeling of security. It provided us with options because we got out of debt so quickly. We were able to choose jobs that were kind of more rewarding and allowed us to do the things we wanted to do versus, like, for example, both of my roommates in physical therapy school, they graduated kind of a more traditional path where they had about six figures of debt. And so they both had to chase the highest paying job, where I was able to go for the job that was most rewarding. And it was a little bit lower paying up front, but it let me accumulate benefits, vacation time. So I was living better. So just starting to reframe spending less as a positive thing versus sacrifice, it makes it a lot easier, because I'm certainly not some super person that can deprive myself for 10 or 15 years, which is what it still took us. 41 sounds early, but it still took us 15 years. So we weren't suffering and sacrificing. We were actually living, I think, better than most people. And so what we focus on to get that spending down is housing and cars. So we lived in a relatively low cost of living area, and we were just very aggressive paying off our home. And then we drove older used cars because we didn't get caught up in like being defined by what we drive. We just kind of looked at a car as a thing to get you from point A to point B. So we never had car payments, and we paid our mortgage off in like 7 years. So by eliminating those things, we were able to live much better. And then as you start to build a savings rate, stuff like taxes, which I don't know anybody that wants to pay more taxes, it lets you get really creative and really lower how much you're paying in taxes. And stuff like investing fees, which again, I don't know anybody that wants to pay more and would consider that a sacrifice to pay less in investing fees. So all those things and insurance is another one. You don't need as much insurance. So all these things you can really cut down, and you can live a lot better while spending less. And so I think it starts with having that mindset shift.
Talk about the tax planning, because that's not something you hear a whole lot about. So when you say that by you increasing your savings rate, it allowed you to save different ways in taxes, can you help us understand that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest thing for most people working a normal job is just to contribute as much as they can to their work sponsored retirement plan. And that lets you defer taxes and I don't want to get overly technical, but at your highest marginal tax rate, which is the highest rate you pay on the last dollars that you earn. And by building this lifestyle where you live on much less than what you earn, once you get to the point where you can cut back working, you can then recognize that money or pay tax on it at much lower rates. And so it's going to save you. It's definitely going to save you in the year that you earn the money. And then most likely you're going to be able to pay your taxes at a later date at much lower rates. And the only way it doesn't work is because you've saved far too much, which is a pretty good problem to have. It means you had too much money and you end up spending the same amount or a little bit more on taxes, but that's only because you've oversaved and you're in a position of abundance, which is a good position to be in. So that's the simplest thing that most people can do. And you can start doing that today.
And I read in your book that when you first came across all these fire blogs and you started reading and started applying what you were learning, you later on you found that your focus was off and that the joy of the process wasn't present. So can you kind of talk about how, for someone who's listening to this and going to read your book and going to want to get into the mode of trying to achieve financial independence, talk about some of the mistakes that you made as you were trying to get on this track?
Yeah. So we talked about how we were really saving about half of our income, my wife and I were, for about 10 years till we ever found Fire Blogs. And because of that, we were making mistakes with our investing and our tax planning, which slowed us down. But by the same token, because we weren't so focused on getting to retirement as quickly as we could, we were just enjoying our life. So because we saved on those big things while we were while we were saving all this money and building up our net worth, which allowed us to achieve financial independence quickly, we were also traveling. Like we've been to Africa, we've been to Australia, we've done high altitude mountaineering in South America and in Mexico. I've been to the Super Bowl. I definitely, like when I started reading these Fire blogs, they talked about like extreme frugality. And if I would say my lifestyle was extreme frugality, I would feel like a fraud, to be honest. Like we were living better than most of the people, again, just because we got the big things, housing, cars, right. And so we were able to do these things. And as an example, like in one day, we spent a couple $1,000s going to the Super Bowl. And people say, well, how can you possibly justify that? How can you do that? But almost everybody we know carries in a two car family, you're carrying two car payments. So let's say you're paying $500 a month in car payments for 12 months. That's $6,000. So even dropping that to go to the Super Bowl, we still saved more than most people do just because we weren't making a car payment. So if you really understand where your money goes and how you can save it, yeah, we were able to live really well without feeling like we were ultra frugal.
Everyone knows why life insurance is important, but many of us choose to ignore the reality of what would happen if we were to die suddenly without proper protection. The results could be devastating for your surviving family members, leaving them with a large bill for your final expenses, or even worse, loss of the family home because they can no longer cover the mortgage.
Term life insurance gives you peace of mind at a price you can afford. Term life insurance allows you to meet your financial obligations today while still protecting your family's future tomorrow.
If you don't currently have a life insurance policy, you are not alone. According to Life Insurance Statistics and Facts, which is a report put out by the life insurance industry, about 43% of the population don't own a life insurance policy in any amount.
Wow. Buying life insurance doesn't have to be complicated. Legal & General America make it easy for you to protect your family's financial future.
As one of the nation's leaders in low-cost, high-quality life insurance to over 1.3 million families, they know how to protect you.
Legal & General America makes understanding and applying for life insurance easy. You can get a free quote by going to hisnorhermoney.com/LGA. The links are also in the description box below.
So I think that, you said a couple of times that a real like chess piece in your game of life that allowed you to choose financial independence for you and your family was being real strategic with your housing cost and your transportation costs. So what went into the planning? Like, we know that you said you moved to an area that didn't have a high cost of living, and you chose used cars. So give us like your criteria that as you all were shopping for a house in a low cost of living area, as you all were choosing, what type of used car to buy. Can you talk about some of the criteria that went into your decision making?
Yeah, and honestly, I think a lot of it was just I think we were kind of lucky in just kind of stumbling into some of these things, and so it wasn't extremely intentional. But I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and we lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is not a real high cost of living area, but it's a major city, so it's not super cheap either. And so we got out of school. I got out in 2001, and we got married. And the first thing we do, like most people, we went out, we bought a house with 5% down. And I was driving about 45 minutes north every day and working. I was just getting started in my career, so I was working long hours, a lot of Saturdays. And so I was spending an hour and a half commuting and then working these long hours. My wife was riding to a park and ride and riding into the city, which was about 30 minutes one way on the bus. And same thing, working really long hours. And so we had this house and we couldn't enjoy it. We bought this house because it had an in-ground pool, which we thought was like the coolest thing. we never could use it because we were getting home so late. It was cool in the evenings. So then every Saturday we'd go to our pool and it would be like overtaken with algae. We'd have to shock it. And then we couldn't get in because of the chemicals. Like, it had this beautiful landscaping. It was this retired couple that lived there before us. And one year we killed everything because we had no time to work on the yard. It had like this man cave where I was envisioning guys would be coming over to watch the Steeler games and hang out. We never had people because, again, like, we were so busy with stuff. So in one year we just decided, like, we're going to just uproot and start over. So what we did is we sold the house, and that was pretty scary. And it definitely took a leap of faith. But we moved back to our hometown where cost of living was lower. And we didn't want to jump back into that housing thing. So we rented a really cheap place for like 3 or 4 years. And in doing that, and we talked about saving my whole salary, we basically paid over half of the cost of our new house once we did build it. So we lived in a new construction, but we had like about $100,000 mortgage because we paid more than half of it down while it was being built, because we saved for that couple of years. And so just that simple change changed everything. And then we built closer to where we were going to be working. So my wife ended up having about a 5-minute commute, and I had about a 20-minute commute. And so we cut that drastically. And then we kept driving the same cars that we always drove. So it was a combination of not just the car that we drove, but also the time and the money you spend commuting and depreciating your car. So by making that one decision to change our housing, it also changed our transportation. And in one thing, it saved us dramatically, and it set us on a completely different trajectory for our life.
Now, the name of the book is Choose FI, and you and your wife were kind of built upon some things that were ingrained in you, like being good savers, staying away from debt. For someone listening that, they're the opposite. Their natural inclination is to consume, is to spend, but they want to do better. So talk about that mental shift that needs to happen in order to choose FI over the opposite. How does a person in that state of mind, but yet they have the desire to do better, to move in this direction of financial independence, what would your advice be to them?
Yeah, so I love your emphasis on the word choose, because I think a lot of people just focus on the financial independence and think this is a finance book, but it's really about choosing a different way of life. And a lot of that, so you talked about those 3 big areas: spend less, earn more, invest better. But we actually started the book with a whole nother section about shifting your mindset. And I think that's really where it's at. And so I think, again, a lot of people associate saving with sacrifice. And we use this term in the book of being a valuist, where you line up your spending with your values. So I think the first thing that people need to do is know where your money is going. So I'm not a big budgeter, but whether it means developing a budget or just tracking where your money goes, which is what my wife and I do, and then just looking on paper and say, where does my money go? And does that line up with what I really want? So if you say you want to have a life that focuses on traveling or spending time with your kids, but the majority of your money is going to a big housing payment and a fancy car, it's not lining up. So you really have to line up to, am I building the life that I want? Am I spending money on things that are important to me? Or am I spending on things that society says you're supposed to? And you do have to make choices. And sometimes that can be hard. But if you realize that it's worth it, and you realize that this is accessible to normal people in the long term, and long term is 10 or 15 years, which if you're willing to put in the time, then you can have the life that you desire, going forward from that.
And how were you all strategic in your planning and your organizing to be able to, on one hand, go this 15-year period where you're being so wise with your money that you're able to retire early and achieve financial independence, yet at the same time, you're climbing mountains, you're going to Super Bowl, you hear that, you're like, how? Wait, that sounds like 2 different messages. So talk about the strategy behind being able to position yourself financially to stop working 20 years before your peers and still living this great life of travel. And basically, if it's not travel for you, whatever it is for you that's pleasurable, how are you able to do both at the same time?
Yeah, so I think for everybody, really, there's going to be some period where you have to make some hard choices. We were very fortunate in that we talked about how my wife worked full time while going to school full time. That wasn't an easy choice. Most people, I think, would have just taken the loans and dug themselves into debt, but that was a very hard choice. And then we talked about, we started life kind of on that standard path where we went out and bought a house. That was the first decision we made. And we made that hard choice to turn around and sell it in a year, relocate to a less desirable area to live, honestly. Like, we like living in the city, but in theory, at least we did. But the actual lifestyle we had, it was much better by moving to a small town where it was cheaper to live. And as a healthcare professional, I was able to actually make more money. So you have to make choices. But once you make those choices and once you start to build momentum, what you find is that instead of just scrapping and saving and every little thing is an emergency, life just feels better. For us, like, we had a lot of leeway. We were able to start doing these things. And then once we found the whole FIRE message and we started getting serious, what we realized is we didn't know these tax planning things. And we started the changes we made at that point. We started saving about $10,000 a year in taxes every year. And that's a pretty easy decision. And we started saving a similar amount in investing fees because we had already built up. And that's a pretty easy decision. So your life really gets better once you get on track and the ball starts rolling and you start accumulating wins. And it's almost like the ball's rolling downhill instead of trying to constantly push it up the hill. But you do have to make those hard choices at some point. And for us, it was getting our education while not accumulating debt and making that initial choice with housing and cars.
So for you on the investing side, for you and your wife, was it strictly like index funds? Did you do real estate? Like, when you say that you were building up this net worth, what were your vehicles of choice in that vein?
Yeah. So when we started, we were firmly entrenched in the idea that normal people can't learn to invest their money. So we went with a financial advisor who, it turns out now, we didn't have any idea what questions to ask. So we just really didn't ask any questions. But he was really a commissions-based salesman. And so we knew we were paying a fair amount in commissions up front, but we didn't really know what to compare that to because we were really ignorant and financially illiterate as far as that goes. And then what we didn't realize is that comes with a lot of fees on the back end as well, which we had no idea we were paying. And it also leads to really conflicted advice, which we had no idea we were receiving. So just by taking control of our investments there, then we did go, and now we are pretty strictly index fund investors. And so we cut our fees by probably 95%. And that also allowed us to start utilizing our retirement accounts, which we hadn't been using. And that's how we saved so much on the taxes. And then also going forward, the money that we were investing was kicking off its own income, which we didn't need, but it was producing more taxation. So we were able to eliminate the vast majority of that. So that's kind of what we did. Yes, we're index investors, but it took us a long and painful path to get to that point.
So you've been writing about financial independence for a number of years. You've had people ask you a bunch of questions. What do you think is the difference between those who say they want to achieve financial independence and those who actually achieve it?
I think it's very simple. It's choosing to make the decision and then actually taking action. The things we write about in the book, we kind of go back to what we started the conversation, but they're simple, but they're not easy. Making those decisions to start developing a savings rate, making the decisions to be more valuable and increase your value to earn more money. And then once you create that spread between what you earn and what you spend, learning to invest it, all of those things are simple, but none of them are easy because you have to take action, and you can't sit back and wait for things to happen because there's nobody's coming to save you. You have to kind of get the ball rolling and you have to start on your own.
A lot of people that listen to us are married or in a relationship, and they just heard, your advice. They are on their way. They go get your book. They're not sure how to convey this message to their spouse or their significant other. How do you advise a person that's fired up about the potential of achieving FI, but maybe their spouse is a little less than enthusiastic? They want to know how to, impart that enthusiasm to them. Do you have any tips?
So I think it goes back to figuring out what you value as a couple, as a team. And I talked about how with my wife and I, we kind of were able to get on the same page very early, both of us not wanting to live a life of debt and getting out of debt quickly, and then just feeling good and saving. And if you feel good and you're both on the same page, it's really not a struggle at all. It's actually pretty easy. And really kind of interesting kind of sidebar on that question. So my wife and I didn't come from much, and saving felt really good for both of us. And so this was pretty easy. And you would think that, you're doing this and you're going to be happy when you get to this point. And as we kind of got into this whole FIRE message, and as we started to make the transition to start leaving my job, it was actually one of the more stressful periods in our relationship because, especially for my wife, saving felt really good. It was a security blanket, having grown up with having a lot of financial insecurity. And so when we're saving 50%, almost anything could happen and we're going to be fine because we have this other income and now we're building all this. And when you go to what most people consider as a traditional retirement where you're spending down your assets, I kind of liken it to playing a game of chicken where are you going to run out of money or are you going to run out of life? And it's a total mindset change, and it's just very different. And it caused a lot of strain and stress. And so kind of what we settled on, like you said at the beginning that I retired at 41, I don't even feel comfortable using that word. What we're doing now, my wife works part-time from home. And what we did is used our financial independence to create this position where she was able to work only part-time. She was able to have financial independence or location independence. She was able to get our healthcare. So it felt really good. And I was able to pursue these opportunities that I was really passionate about, writing. And hopefully this is going to make us some money in long term. So it's kind of allowing us to continue to live with abundance, to continue to give, which is really important to us, to continue to not have this scarcity mentality where we are living in fear. And so kind of redefining what retirement means to you and building that lifestyle you want versus escaping this life that you don't like, I think is really important also. And so it's an evolving, ongoing conversation with your spouse, and you have to stay on the same page. And you're going to hit roadblocks, I think, at different points, because I think most people, it's getting started that's hard. And we had an easy time there, but we still hit our roadblocks and we still had our challenges.
Awesome. So, Chris, tell everybody a little bit more about your new book, how they can pick it up, and how they can stay in touch with you.
Yeah. So again, the book is called Choose FI, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. You can find out more about it at choosefi.com/book. And it's on sale now, so you can buy it anywhere that you buy books. And I normally write at the website, Can I Retire Yet? And that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. I'm very responsive through comments and emails that you can find the contact on the site.
Chris, this has been great, man. You opened a lot of eyes and ears with this information, and I'm sure plenty of people are headed to get that book so they can dive a little bit deeper and learn their blueprint to financial independence. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I really hope that I can kind of make this message accessible to people who formerly thought that it wasn't. And that's really the whole goal of the book. So I appreciate you having me on.